Welcome everybody to the Portland Tableau user group and also / the Pacific Northwest Tableau user group. You may have noticed that ever since we've all been locked inside of our houses, we've been cross-posting or cross-marketing each other's Tableau user groups, or everybody in the Pacific Northwest has. So we welcome everybody from all of the various locations across Pacific Northwest. When I looked at the RSVP list last, I think we had more people from the Seattle and surrounding areas in our tug. So, which is fine. We have obviously plenty of room for everybody in a virtual setting, and we welcome all of our neighbors from surrounding cities. So excited that you're all here, and I think we have a pretty good content for you today. Agenda quickly, we'll talk about the Tableau Conference. That's coming up in less than 2 weeks already, which just blows my mind how quickly time has flown and it's fall already. But so obviously it's a different conference this year. And so Debbie will walk us through the nuances of that. And then we have someone from the community that he's showcasing a data viz he created. And just in general, in every tug that we're trying to do in Portland, we really want to showcase someone from the community doing something, either if it's something they're doing for work, something they're doing as a side hobby, something they're doing for some sort of advocacy. And we have a pretty good example of that today. That's with Danny Steinmetz. If anybody is interested in showcasing your work, if you go to the PDX Tug Hub page, there's a place to sign up to be a presenter, and you can go through that route or contact our email directly. And then finally, we have David Taylor from Tableau, and he's going to talk about some of the more exciting new features that we have in the latest release, or some of the latest releases of Tableau. So we're excited to have him join us. It's been a while since we've done a new features presentation, so we're excited for that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie, and she'll talk about the upcoming conference.
Thanks, Ryan. One of the housekeeping thing I wanted to mention is that throughout this, if you have any questions, make sure to drop them into the Q&A feature instead of the chat feature. That'll be easier for us to just keep track. And then you can also upvote other people's questions as well. So just a quick reminder. Do you want to talk a little bit about Tableau Conference, like Ryan just mentioned? It's coming up real soon, October 6th through the 8th. I know what some of you might be thinking, like, I'm kind of burnt out from doing all my Zoom meetings and virtual things, and I don't know if I can, devote more time to being online. I will say that, as someone who's gone to a bunch of conferences in the past, I feel like Tableau works really hard to kind of make 3 things happen at the conference. And one of those is to inspire people. Second thing is to help people learn. And then the last thing is to really help people network. And I had to say, just perusing, everything that Tableau has put together for this year's Tableau conference, ish, I'm just really impressed with how much they've put into trying to really preserve all those elements in a virtual conference experience. And it's 100% free. So I would really encourage you guys to sign up. I'm just going to pivot over to the site itself because I just want to talk through some highlights so that when you get there, you can check it out. When you get to the sign up page, super easy to just either log in with your existing Tableau account or create one. So I did it earlier today, and it took me a minute to just sign up. The home screen, gets you, there's just so much already here to consume. And so the way that the conference is going to work is that there will be, almost 24 hours a day content that will be broadcast across a variety of different channels. And just like in conferences in the past, you're going to see so much content across all kinds of different topical areas. So there really is something for everyone, whether you're looking for industry specific guidance, you're looking for, what's new in Tableau or training, like all of that is still there. And then of course, Tableau has brought amazing speakers this year also. So like Neil deGrasse Tyson is coming back. And if you're wondering, about data night out and performances, John Legend will also be doing a fireside chat and a performance. Pretty amazing. So there's lots of other famous speakers too, like Nate Silver from 538, or Emily Oster if you've read any of her books. So really check that out. In terms of just the networking aspects, the things that I'm super excited to talk through is this concept of brain dates. And Tableau started doing that fairly recently, I think, with a conference, but that's basically kind of like a ad hoc sort of little networking chats that you can set up. And I just hit the launch brain dates button. I love this part about conference because anyone can kind of say like, hey, here's the topic that I want to talk about, and anyone can join. And now they made it super easy to do that virtually. So you can scroll through, join anyone else's, like, for example, this one's about LOD versus table calc. Whether it's how to use Tableau in your agency, or if you don't see a topic here that you want to talk about, you can just click new topic. And I think last year, Ryan, I think you put together our Pacific Northwest kind of meetup as well there at the conference. So, if anyone wants to spin that up, you can just click new topic and then, set up a one-on-one or for a group. So as much as with everything happening this year and feeling like it's just been really hard to connect with people, I think this is just a really good opportunity to kind of keep those connections, just because we're all under the stress of, staying inside and not traveling. So take advantage of these kind of brain dates to just keep talking to new people, learn new things. And sometimes people just want to suggest things for fun too. So it doesn't always have to be about really technical topics. And then the other thing I wanted to point out about the conference is the Tableau Doctor sessions, which they have had in the past. But this year, you can, when you want to book an appointment, you actually have the opportunity to not only talk to like a Tableau product expert, but you can also talk to a Tableau Zen Master. And so then it's just as easy as clicking book appointment, and you kind of get to browse these different kinds of topics. You can browse by the expert, and like there's just so much at our fingertips to stay connected to each other. And yeah, I'm just really impressed that Tableau has put so much into, despite everything happening this year and being limited to a virtual format, like really trying to keep the spirit of the conference alive. And there's fun little, perks in here too. There's a virtual photo booth. If anyone has taken their little Tableau conference picture, you can do that here. So again, like Tableau's put in so much effort to really preserve that experience. And so I just really want to encourage everyone to take advantage of the opportunity. If you cannot, of course, spend 3 days in front of the computer watching all the content, I do think a lot of it will be recorded. So if anything, at least register to make sure that you go back and remind yourself of things that you maybe missed and want to catch up on, if you just don't have the time to really devote to attending all the sessions. So pretty straightforward in terms of registering. Just go to tableau.com/register. And you'll be in. So hope to see some of you guys there, and hope that everyone can catch what they can at the conference.
Thank you, Debbie. And I just signed up yesterday, and I was just totally shocked at how easy it was. I think just because prior conferences and signing up for conferences in general can be kind of a pain, and typically that's because you're trying to deal with your accommodations and figuring out how to convince your boss to let you go and pay for everything and that kind of situation. But you obviously don't have to worry about that anymore because it's free. And so, yeah, the registering took me like 5 minutes, and then I was in the system and ready to go. So look forward to hopefully seeing everyone there. I know I'm gonna try to set up a few brain dates and see what happens. So yeah. Next we have Danny Steinmetz, and again, this is us showcasing someone from the community doing something. And in this particular case, this one's more advocacy oriented. Obviously there's a lot going on in the world, and We mentioned this last time, but we all have a kind of a special gift that we can use, and that's we know how to analyze, we know how to storytell with data and visualize it and get it out there in a something like Tableau Public, in which can be widely shared. That's a unique power that we all have in this room, and and there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot to talk about and share, and lots of data to present to others in some compelling way. So Danny's going to talk about something that's pretty topical, and that's voting. And what I also liked about when I first heard Danny talking about this presentation was that this dashboard, was that he really thought about how to limit his own personal bias when putting together a dashboard. And that's obviously a very, very important concept that we all have to contend with when we're putting together data stories. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Danny and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I'm going to drop a link to the viz on Tableau Public, but I'll also go ahead and kind of share it on my screen so we're all looking at the same thing. So yeah, I was talking with one of my coworkers about, everything going on in the world. What can we do? We have a pretty big responsibility as people who know how to visualize data, and people love showing as much information or all of their thoughts in as little of a place as possible. And I think, the two main ways of doing that are memes and then infographics. So one of those is a little bit more responsible, in my opinion, of showing infographics like this. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us as people who know how to use Tableau and other data visualization tools. So one of the first things that I wanted to show is, voting is really topical right now. Yesterday was National Registration Day. But with such kind of a hot topic right now, I really wanted to be sure to be as, understanding and anticipatory of, the biases that would happen here. And, I saw there's kind of two opportunities for bias. There's the bias that I would have as the designer, and then the bias of the people interpreting these visualizations. So came up with a few different ways to try to navigate this as best as I could. One of the most, fundamental places that we often forget to look at for bias is in the data itself. So when I was searching for all of this data about voting, you could find, 10 different statistics that would, either prove your point or disprove your point, or just say completely, seemingly contradictory things. So tracking down the data source is one of the trickiest parts of this. I decided to go with data from the Census Bureau, and I could have gotten a lot of data from a lot of different places, and I looked in a lot of different places, but the more I went down this rabbit hole, the more I was torn away from trying to tell a story and more drawn in towards finding as much information, being as, apolitical, as unbiased as possible, and kind of hit this crossroad of, well, I need to decide, am I going to fall more into this camp of showing as much information and letting people come to their own conclusions as much as they want, or am I going to leverage my power as the viz designer to tell a story? And, I think we always fall into one of these two camps to some extent, and it's important to yourself to admit which camp you're falling into. So I admitted that I was doing telling a story, but it was important to me to also tell that story in the most unbiased way possible. So one of the easiest viz types to understand is the bar chart. We can all tell which are longer, which are shorter. So I stuck pretty heavily on the bar chart in this visualization. The other thing I did was kind of divide up these sections by colors. So I have this breakdown of the different groups of Americans that abstain from voting and their reasons for abstaining from voting. And I found consistently there's this story that people reported voting for too busy or conflicting schedules. So I made sure to highlight all of these answers pretty consistently, just to show where it is, but still making sure to show it within context. So making sure to show that 65 and plus and up, it's not the most common one. If I had just said the percent for each of these, someone might have assumed something incorrectly. I also made sure I saw two potential solutions for this abstention as election day as a holiday and vote by mail, thinking very heavily on, you look at all the reasons people didn't vote, too busy or conflicting schedules. Two potential solutions that we've seen have been election day and vote by mail. So I tried to kind of make the background a different color here so we could start to establish like this is a little bit more, politically leaning, if you want to use that terminology, but this is my interpretation here at the bottom. So trying to clarify, this is the data and this is my interpretation. Ultimately, my goal was to start a conversation and to get people to take action. So focusing on that, I think actually gave me a lot of freedom and made me a lot more comfortable making this visualization. The last kind of bias thing I want to talk about, or bias navigation tool I used, is you may notice that the headers for each of these are kind of jumping back and forth, which isn't visual best practice. But that was actually kind of inspired by this post about how to not visualize like a racist. And this section really stood out to me, where it's talking about the risk of mental health. And as you navigate between these three different groups, it breaks it down by gender, by sex, by ethnicity to some extent, and then poverty level. And it's very easy when you look at the three of these to kind of want to connect these groups together. It's called apophenia or patternicity. And you would look at this and you might think that Black males not in poverty are your most likely to be at risk for mental health. But when we look at the actual statistics, that's actually the third most at-risk group. The most at risk is white males in poverty. So thinking more towards that, I didn't want people to draw these connections between 18 to 24-year-olds with a bachelor's degree or more. So just finding a way to kind of separate these out is the reasoning that I had those headers jump back and forth. Some other more technical stuff. So here in the top left, I have this ballot barriers. That's just a bar chart where I took some kind of random measures and dimensions from my data and then put a white box over it that had text in it that said ballot barriers. This is an idea by one of my coworkers that I really liked as a good way to start to show that. And then you may also notice that, we have the tooltips down here, but up here, there's not that visual distraction when I hover over this. It's just all of the information. All I did there was in Tableau itself, I took one of these blank boxes and just floated it over. So if I remove that, you can see we get this interaction that might be a little distracting, but by adding that box over it, it's just a really clean way to make it so that you only interact with the things we want the end consumer to interact with. And then the very last thing I want to call out is making sure that if you are doing a viz like this, having a call to action. So here I highlighted all of the states that have election day as a civic holiday. And if you notice, for example, Portland does not have that. If I'm interested in, actually doing something, I can click on that state and I have a link that goes directly to contact your senator. So trying to make as few steps in between your visualization and an opportunity to take action, I think is really important. Additionally, if you click down here in the bottom left on that vote button, it should take you, might be broken right now, but it should take you directly to vote.gov where you can check to see if you're registered. So making sure to have all of these, call to actions and things that you can actually participate and do, I think is really important, especially with this increased importance of data visualization in the modern world. So looking at some of the questions, so there's questions about kind of how long it took for me to make the viz. It took quite a while. I do have a day job, so I wasn't spending all my time doing this, but for me, building the visualization, you can tell I could have shown all this really easily and not put as much visual design into it, and still, I think, told the story effectively. I just kind of wanted to practice my design. So I think all in all, it took me over the course of 2 weeks, probably 3 or 4 days outside of work for, 3 or 4 hours sometimes, just making sure I collected all of the data, looking for all of this, and then also going down some rabbit holes I maybe spent too much time on.
We've all been there, Danny.
Yeah. Let's see, why is the viz non-interactive? So that's another thing, is this was a pretty small data set. The Census Bureau really just spits out a CSV file that, I mean, I didn't aggregate or disaggregate this data at all. So if I had chose sum, min, max, these are all going to be the same number. It wasn't broken down by state. So that was a limitation in the data. But like I said, I wanted to keep it to one data source from a pretty reputable source, that being the Census Bureau. Yeah, and the bottom was just collected for vote by mail and election day. Election day was actually kind of tricky to track down. I admittedly went to the Wikipedia to find it, but then found a more legitimate source that's referenced here at the bottom.
Cool. Danny, there's another question about tips for using census data or just generally navigating the census website.
Yeah, it's not as easy of a website to navigate as I would like it to be. You do kind of have to get into the nitty-gritty of that data and open all of those Excel files that they have. They don't give any previews. Maybe I should add something on here, a call to action, to have them clean up their act a little bit.
The people at the Census Bureau, actually, there's quite a few Tableau users there, and I've noticed that they have published a few dashboards on Tableau Public that help you download some census data a little easier. I'll try to find that and put a link to it. Obviously, there's a ton of different data that the census provides, but so I don't know if it's totally comprehensive, but it's could be very useful.
Awesome. As I mentioned, I did a lot of research into kind of how to do this, how to visualize more responsibly, and I had these 3 different articles. I also have an article that I wrote that talks about some of this more in depth. It has links to everything. I'll definitely share that in the chat. However, I want to make sure that everyone pays attention to David, because he's got some really, really cool stuff, and there's some really cool new features in 2020.3. So I'll share these, but I'll wait till after David is finished presenting.
So yeah, and we should move to the next presenter just so we have enough time. I'll try to, or if Danny, if you can look in the QA, there's still a couple questions, and if you can maybe type those answers into to everyone. Danny, that was great. Again, beautiful dashboard. I was going to mention one thing I really like about your dashboard is very great usage of the tooltips. If you hover over some of the bars, the information provided in the tooltips really does add a lot of extra important context, and isn't just simply repeating something you can see from the view itself, but like you hover on the tooltip and it's providing much more information if the user wants to see it. So great job, Danny. Next we have David Taylor. We're excited to have him. He's a pretty well-credentialed person to be talking on the subject of new features and to simply be talking at a user group. If he looks familiar to anybody, he has helped run or has been a heavy participator in a lot of the user groups all throughout the Pacific Northwest for a number of years. So we're excited to have him come and tell us what's new in 2020.3 and maybe some other features that we've missed in other more recent releases. So I'll hand it over to you, David.
Oh my gosh. Did we lose Ryan?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, good.
Maybe we lost you.
I definitely lost you for a while.
Okay, well,
Okay?
I introduced you, and it's all you now.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Ryan. Danny, thanks for the great presentation also. Yeah, my name's Dave Taylor. I live in Boise, Idaho, and I've been at Tableau for, 3 years now? And prior to that, I was with a Tableau partner, and I've been in BI my whole career. So yeah, delighted to be talking to you guys today about Tableau 2020.3. And I think we're going to save questions towards the end. So just put those in the Q&A as you did before. That should work just fine. And I'll try to slam us through this in a half an hour or so. We'll have
David, I don't know if you can hear me, but okay. Looks like we lost David. Hopefully he can join back in. So I'll give him a couple minutes.
back.
Welcome back.
Oh my gosh. I had a bad feeling about this. All right, screen share.
Yep, we can see
That's
it.
great.
And where did I leave off?
I think you were just transitioning into the first slide.
Okay.
So I think into this slide, yeah.
I'm going to shut off all the Wi-Fi devices in my house. Give me 1 second.
Hopefully all the smoke from our fires over here in Oregon aren't interfering with your Wi-Fi. I don't think that's a thing, but.
Everything. Okay. Hopefully that helps or at least doesn't hurt. But anyway, before we dive into 2020.3, just looking back, some of the great features that have been released over the course of the year. Relationships were a big one. Metrics were just a couple releases ago. Set controls, reordering favorites, level of detail calculations in prep, view recommendations in 19.4, creating extracts in the browser. So much great stuff. And as I think back to stuff that's not on this chart, I mean, it wasn't even like 5 or 6 quarters ago and we didn't have prep conductor, we didn't have data management, server management. So it's been just really fun to see the product continue to march forward like this. And here's my favorite stuff in 2020.3. This is always subjective, I suppose. I'll have a couple slides at the end that have kind of the other new features that didn't make the cut. But we'll spend time on most of these over the course of the next 20 minutes or so I won't belabor them here. But the Spatial File Union is a big one, relationship improvements, and probably the biggest marquee feature is in Tableau Prep, the database write back. And I can't see the Q&A or the chat at all right now, Ryan. So if something urgent comes up, you'll have to just interrupt. All right, so first, on desktop, the Spatial File Union. This is a new technique that's supported now for spatial files. Tableau's had unions forever, but just in case you're a new user and you're not too familiar with unions, unions are a great technique, pretty critical for any of us who are authoring visualizations for a career. A database join, we all generally understand at the bottom of the slide here, that kind of makes your data wider, right? It takes two files and stitches them together on a joined column. And a union does the opposite. It kind of extends your data top to bottom. So a union is perfect for data that's kind of like this. If I've got a directory full of files that have data from different countries, and I want to analyze those countries, you know, one next to the other, you want to kind of just stack them on top of each other. That's what a union does. And in 2020.3, we support that for spatial files. We've never done that before. And I'll, over the course of this demo, be bouncing back and forth between the slides and an actual live demo. So here's one of the kind of cool things you can do with a unioned set of spatial files. This is data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Foundation, and they track hurricane wind speeds every 6 hours or so during hurricane season. So all those come in a shapefile, and if you union those together, you can get a nice animated visualization like this, where you can just watch the storm track over time. And setting that kind of thing up is pretty straightforward. It follows the same paradigms that you're used to using with a regular union. So I'll just create a new spatial file data source here by picking up one of those shape files. That's the SHP extension right there. It'll take a second to ingest that file because these spatial files are actually a little bit big and onerous. It's not just supported for shape files, of course, it's supported for all the spatial files that Tableau supports. I struggle to remember what most of those are, but you know, KML files and other file formats that kind of accomplish the same thing. And
I could add in there GeoJSON, and then they allow some server connections to hosted Esri data sources as well.
Yep, as well as a lot of geographic data stored in databases. That's another feature that I think grew in 2020.3 as well. Well, it didn't take this long during any of my testing, but I guess we're going to wait a minute or so here. All right, so there's one spatial file. And now if you want to join something, of course, you drag it over and you drop it here. If you want to union something, you just move it right below and drop it onto the union drop zone. So there's the next shape file, all union. And then I'll do one more after that. And so now I've got 3 of those time points in my query. And if I go to a blank sheet, there's the data source. I'll just double click geometry. Point ID needs to be a dimension. And then I'll put that onto detail as well, the wind speed onto the color. It'll probably look a little sharper if I take away those borders. And now I've got that same technique here. As soon as I drop the table name onto the pages shelf, I can watch the winds through the hurricane season right like that. So there you go. That's unioning of shape files. Next, we'll talk about improvements to relationships. This was a really big deal in the prior release, 2020.2. Relationships allow you to do all kinds of things with really complex data sources. So if you have multi-fact tables that you need to stitch together, it gives you a lot more flexibility than you had prior to 2020.2. And it will let you do much more elegantly things that you prior had to use blends for, or level of detail or other techniques. So I definitely encourage you to go back and look at relationships a little bit. What we'll study here are some of the improvements related to the way you can join things in relationships. And that would be non-equijoins and calculation-based joins. And this is a fun little topic to kind of get to know a little bit as well, but you're going to use those techniques if you want to do kind of some tricky things that actually come up quite a bit, depending on the data you're working with. But here's a basic Superstore report, and I'm looking at order dates and ship dates for all of these orders, right? So if you want to answer this question, how many orders were being processed on New Year's Eve day on the 3rd of January, you have to look at the order date and the ship date for every order, right? So if it was ordered on the 29th but not shipped till the 2nd, then it was being processed on the 31st. It was not being processed on the 3rd, this is not the kind of set of answers that you can get with a standard equi-join. So that's what we'll kind of study right now. So if I go to this data source, it's a relationships data source that needs some changes. And what I'm going to start with to answer that question is just a basic date dimension table. So this is just a simple spreadsheet that's got a row for every day over the course of maybe a couple of years. And you need that to start with if you're going to create the answer to this kind of question. So there it is, right? There's the 1st of January, 2nd of January, et cetera, for a few years. And then from Superstore, I'll just drag in orders. I'll use the new relationships paradigm here where you get the little noodle. That's great. And then the new feature that I'm going to showcase is going to be where you define the join between those two queries. So here it is, and most of the time you're going to create data sets that have equi-joins, that little equal sign right there. But in order, again, to answer this question, I need something different. I need to join the date from here with the date from here. But I already have one problem. This actually doesn't have a date column. I've got the day, the month, and the year, but I need to create a calculation to bring those together. You couldn't do this prior to 2020.3, but a quick make date calculation. I can put that together. I'll copy it to the clipboard because we'll use it again in a little bit, but that'll give me the date based on the month, day, and year. And for my analysis, I need all the rows where that date is greater than or equal to the order date. As well as that date needs to be less than or equal to the ship date. So that's the kind of relationship for which you need a join that doesn't have an equal sign in it. That's now supported with relationships, so there we go. I'll just pause there, let you all digest that. An order is in process if it was ordered before the ship date and shipped after the date we're talking about. And now that I've got that data, I can just put it together on a viz. So the first thing I need is a measure in my rows. I'll put my order IDs there. I want to count those actually. And then I want to break that down by my date. And if I do it on the daily level, it gets really fun to work with really quickly. There you go. You can see a lot of texture there. On average, we have about 20 orders open on any given day. And our high water mark towards the holiday season is above 50. So that's the second new feature I'll highlight. The third one is pretty awesome too. We've introduced a whole bunch of new predictive modeling capabilities to Tableau. So there's two functions, model quartile and model percentile, that I'll go into, that'll help you extend some of the predictions that we've had in the product for a while. We've always had forecasting in the product. We've always had those very simple trend lines in the product, but hopefully these functions will help you take that mojo a little bit further. So I'm just going to go to this viz I already authored called Predicting Life Expectancy. And there's a dot on this viz for every country in the kind of standard world indicators data set. And their life expectancy is on the y-axis. And then how much money they spend on health is on the x-axis. So there's a lot of variety here, of course. I added a trend line, and this is just your basic trend line that you've always been able to add. But what's powerful about this viz is the color shelf. That color is powered by a calc called this predicted life expectancy using those new functions. So that's what I'll show you right now. If I just right click on that. This is using model percentile. And what you're telling Tableau in this function is that, Tableau, I want you to predict life expectancy, female life expectancy in my case. And I want you to predict that based on that health expenditure per capita. Tableau is going to create a statistical model based on your independent and dependent variables. And then the result of this function is going to be a number between 0 and 1 that tells you how far this particular country is from what the model predicted for all of your data. So if I look at that, it starts to make sense, right? A country that's right here on the line, like Saudi Arabia, the model predicts, the model prediction is almost exactly what Saudi Arabia's life expectancy is, 77. That's why it's right on the trend line, and that's why its color is gray. It's not too blue, it's not too red. And then as you get farther from the line, the color becomes more saturated, like Botswana here. Botswana has a life expectancy of only 46, which is far below what the model would have predicted given the spending on health per capita. And one other thing that's really important about this function is that mine is really basic, right? Mine is only the health expenditure per capita. And I did that just so I could show you the trend line, and it's all just two-dimensional and it's really easy to understand. But you can add other things to your prediction as well, including things that aren't even numeric, like maybe the number of days it takes to start a business. Is that something that might affect life expectancy? If you add other things to your model, the model adapts, it becomes a multivariable regression model, and you'll start to see colors pop above and below the line, right? So there's Cuba. Its life expectancy is pretty darn high, 81. What I would have predicted it to be much lower, that's why it's red, because it probably takes an awful long time to start a business in Cuba. So there's a lot going on in that pretty simple function. And there's one other one that I'll highlight here, and that's this predicted 10% threshold. If I show you that one as well, the principle is the same. You're still predicting something based on something else. But there's another argument here too that says I want to see just the 10% upper bound. So in this case, the function will actually return a life expectancy below which the model would predict that only 10% of your countries would lie, right? So that result I'm using in the tooltip. So Gabon here has a life expectancy of 64, and my 90 and 10% thresholds are in the orange text in the tooltip there. I would have predicted it to be between 65 and 81. So it's a little bit below that kind of 80% confidence interval that I had. All right, so those are going to open up a lot of new possibilities there. Incidentally, the statistical number crunching is being done by the same engine that powers explain data, which is a feature that was added to the product last year, mid-year. The next one I'll talk about is parameter actions clear settings. So we've had parameter actions for a while, and I'll show you what those are and kind of talk through the feature back in my viz. But here's a dashboard with a parameter action. It has this horizontal reference line. Right now that line is 81. And that reference line is just set by a parameter. Super simple, right? You change the parameter to 55. The line changes. Change it to 10, change it to 20, doesn't matter. The line just follows the parameter and shows you whatever value you've input. But this dashboard also has a parameter action. And what that means is if I want my reference line to be the life expectancy for Namibia, I just click on Namibia. And behind the scenes, there's a parameter action that sets that parameter to 67. So hopefully you've heard of parameter actions, maybe used parameter actions. They're super impressive and fun way to add a lot of interactivity to your dashboards. But what's new in this release is that there previously was no way to dictate what happens when you just deselect Namibia. So if I just click into the white space of my viz, until 2020.3, there was no way to tell Tableau to snap my reference back to the 81 for the US. But with this release, you can do that. It's a dashboard action, of course. There's my parameter action. And if I edit that action, you can see exactly what we're talking about. It's right down here, and you can now specify that when you clear the selection, I want that parameter to go back to 81. And I don't think parameter actions have been around for that long, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 releases, but that clear action was the new thing introduced in 0.3. Now we'll start kind of talking about some of the things that are on the border between Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server. On the server, there's a concept of a data quality warning. If you've got Tableau Server, over time that server might have 10 or 20 or 100 or a million different data sources on it, right? And you can flag those data sources if they have quality warnings, right? So going back to my viz, I'm connected to a couple of server-based data sources in this viz, like Demo Superstore here. That data source does have a data quality warning, and it's super simple. There's now just an icon in desktop that tells you that that server data source has a warning. So you can click through, you can go to the server, you can look at that data quality warning, and it's no longer unknown to you just because you happen to be on desktop. This one doesn't have a demo, but this was definitely something that a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. The Tableau calculation logic has never had an in operator before. So nowadays you can make a case statement like this that says when the country is in Uruguay or Peru or Paraguay or Ecuador or Colombia or South America, then do something. Previously, you'd have to actually type in if the country equals Uruguay, or the country equals Peru, or country equals Paraguay, or country equals Ecuador. It got to be pretty verbose, and the in keyword right here will hopefully accelerate authoring some functions for all of you. That one's pretty simple, so I felt like I didn't need to demonstrate it. Another one happens on the upgrade of Tableau Desktop. Prior to .3, if you did an upgrade, this would be empty. We wouldn't have any of your prior visualizations, but now, starting in this release, we're going to actually start porting those prior visualizations from your previous install, so that won't be empty anymore when you do an upgrade. And another one that doesn't have a demo, but there's a concept that's pretty new called a dynamic parameter. We talked about parameters a minute ago in the context of those parameter actions. But we also have the possibility to set parameter values when you open a viz to a specific data value. So if you're opening a financial visualization and there's a parameter for your effective financial month, we can set that parameter's default to whatever the prior closed month was from your data warehouse. And you could set that up for any parameter in any visualization, but what you couldn't do was expect that parameter default to change when you refreshed your data. So if you had that viz open for a long time, something behind the scenes might have changed. Now if you hit F5 or refresh in your browser, not only will all the data in your viz refresh, but that default parameter value can refresh as well. And the way I do these presentations is I kind of transition from desktop to server to prep to other stuff like TabPy or the bridge or other things we have. So we're definitely leaving the desktop now at this point, and we'll talk about Tableau Server. And this is an enhancement that seems pretty minor, but it should be pretty darn revelatory when the rubber actually hits the road. So I'm going to go out to the server. And I'm going to subscribe to this viz, probably the most boring viz I could probably even dream of creating. But there's always been a subscription button, of course, right? When you're on the server, you can tell Tableau, I want to subscribe to this visualization. And I can tell Tableau when I want to be subscribed. Do I want the PDF? Do I want the entire workbook or just this view? Do I want just the image? I can give it the email, whatever subject I want. I can subscribe my whole team if I prefer, and I can tell it, when it should be scheduled. Is this something I want daily? Is it something I just want Mondays and Thursdays? Is it hourly? Is it weekly? All that's configurable. But the new thing is this, the frequency. A lot of these visualizations are based on data sources on the server, right? You might have one database that's got 100 vizzes plugged into it. And when it comes to subscribing to those visualizations, maybe that database gets refreshed at midnight, and maybe that refresh takes 2 or 3 hours, right? So you're not really sure if it's going to end at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. Maybe some days it goes long and it's not even done till 6 in the morning. And I want to get it when it's fresh, but I'm not exactly sure when to schedule it for, because I'm not exactly sure when that data is going to be refreshed. And I certainly don't want to get my subscription pushed out to me at 2 a.m. only to find that the data was refreshed at 5 a.m. and I'm getting stale data in my inbox when I show up in the morning. So this frequency option is new, and it lets you specify that I want to get this subscription delivered to me whenever that data gets refreshed. So as soon as it happens on the server, Tableau will look and see all the subscriptions aligned to that specific frequency, and it'll push all of them out when the data gets refreshed. And that's actually a pretty big deal if you think about it. It'll probably eliminate a lot of subscriptions that were being pushed out previously with potentially stale data. Next, we'll talk about Ask Data a little bit. There's colloquial suggestions now in Ask Data. That's kind of a mouthful, but it's pretty slick. And a lot of you might not have seen Ask Data or played with Ask Data very much. So we'll start with just kind of a brief introduction to what that is. But this is just a simple Superstore data source that I've published up to Tableau Server, of course. And Ask Data is fantastic. It's our natural language processing engine, of course. So instead of looking at a visualization of that data, you can just do something like, I just want to see sales by state. Just type it in, hit your enter key, and Tableau will run that VizQL query, return to you the visual according to best practices that corresponds with what you've typed. It opens up analytics to a whole new audience of users that have never learned Tableau Desktop or web authoring. All they need to know how to do is type and they'll get their answer. Let's filter it down just to the West region. That's of course not a column, right? I just typed the word West and Tableau knew that West was a region and it filtered it down to that. I could also say something like, just give me the last 24 months. Tableau's going to look and it's going to find out that order date is the only date in this data source. So it's going to assume that I want to filter that down to the last 24 months. That is true. I can even do kind of really deep stuff that's maybe even pretty darn hard to do in Tableau Desktop. Like I can say, I just want to see sales for high profit orders. I'm just going to type in high profits. I don't even need to define what I mean by high. Tableau is going to apply some statistics and some standard deviations, and it's going to make a guess as to what I might mean by high, and I can certainly adjust that. Let's be even a little more rigorous when we talk about high profit orders. And I'll click accept, and that's Ask Data. So it's a great utility. If you haven't used it, I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's on Tableau Server automatically. You don't have to install anything or do anything. But what's new in 2020.3 is the ability to do colloquial suggestions. Whenever you open up Ask Data, you're always going to get some suggestions. They're down here, sum of sales by state, sorting the states in alphabetical order. And this list is customizable. It has been for a couple of different releases now. But the colloquialization takes that even a step further. For example, I know a lot of people are going to ask about sum of sales, but I know they're always going to ask about it for the West region. So I can specify that as one of the default suggestions that people are going to see when they go to Ask Data. But maybe Bob runs the West. And Bob has run the West for 10 years. And nobody even says, what were sales in the West? They always say, what were Bob's sales? And everybody just kind of knows that that means sales in the West. Well, that colloquialism that's part of your business can now be incorporated into Ask Data. You can kind of give these just business colloquial expressions here, click Save, and now Bob's sales will be one of the options that your Ask Data users will see right when they open up Ask Data. All right, moving right along. This one will be the easiest one I've ever demoed, but there's a new front page in Tableau Server or Tableau Online called Shared with Me. Whenever you're looking at a viz on the server, you can share it with another user. That user gets an email, and he or she can click through and see the viz that was shared. But after that, there's really no recollection of what people have shared with you. But now there's just this very simple new icon in the navigation bar over here on the left. And if you click on it, you'll see, in my case, the 4 visualizations that folks have shared with me over the life of my tenure on this server. So that's a new button that you'll, I think, just automatically see as soon as you upgrade to 2020.3. Another new server feature that people are pretty excited about, especially if you're an administrator of those servers, is the ability to grant licensing on sign-in. This is going to get a little admin-y here, but a lot of people secure their server based on groups of users, right? Specifically groups that come from Active Directory, the finance group, the marketing group, the sales group. And nowadays, I can just tell Tableau what that group is, where it sits in Active Directory. And I can tell Tableau that anybody who logs in, who's part of one of those groups, if they're logging in for the first time, assign to them a role, maybe an explorer role, maybe a viewer role, maybe even a creator role, but you can specify to just grant that license automatically as soon as they sign in for the first time. This should save admins at least a step or two when they're setting up these groups and assigning new users to be granted roles within Tableau Server. I don't have a demo on that, but that's a feature that a lot of admins are pretty excited about. Another one that admins should be pretty stoked about is this one. If you think about, again, a Tableau server that's been running for a year, a couple of years, there's often a lot of content on there that's pretty stale, no longer relevant, not being used anymore, but it's still being refreshed every night. Nowadays, there's an automatic suspension of those refreshes for workbooks that have been inactive for 30 days. That's configurable, of course, but that should save a lot of cycles on a lot of servers. And we're kind of nearing the end here, but preps right to database is one of the biggest features that we've got. So I'll open up Tableau Prep here. This is a very simple flow that just takes a bunch of orders, aggregates them, and in the output node, there's a new option that lets you output those data to a database table. Prep Builder, of course, has been around for what, 6 quarters now. We've always been able to publish the data source to the server. We've always been able to write it out to a hyper file. This is a new option. Write it directly back to a database table. So I'll specify that. I can, let's call it Dave2 for the table name. You can do the incremental upgrades here, just like anything else. Create the new table. I'll specify to create it here as well. And I'm hooked into Postgres, so if I click Run Flow, it'll query my Excel spreadsheet, and instead of just spitting it out to a hyper file, it'll actually create that Dave2 table in Postgres. And now it's accessible not just to a Tableau viz, but to really anything. You might have other business processes, other APIs that need access to that data. If you can write it out to a database, you can pretty much do anything with it. So it'll take a second to refresh here. But there's that table we just wrote. And now if I drag it onto my panel, I can actually see the data just to kind of prove to you that it's really writing data. And there we go. And I think that's all for the demos, but there's a few other features that I'll run through. Data catalog is improved in .3. You can group external assets now. So if you have assets that were in there redundantly, like maybe once with its IP address, once with one DNS name, once with another DNS name, you can group those together like we're doing here. A lot of you might not have used the catalog, but it's a wonderful way to add a lot of governance and lineage to your Tableau server. Tableau Bridge has some updates now as well. Admins are now only responsible for the setup and the software upkeep. Users can do a lot more when it comes to the day-to-day kind of care and feeding of Tableau Bridge connected data sources. And this was actually a pretty darn big release. So I've got 3 slides here just full of other awesome stuff that I really won't have time to demonstrate. So if anybody sees anything here that you want to drop into the chat, I can try to answer questions about it if you're curious about it. I might not even know the details of some of these, but it ended up being a pretty darn big release that we had back in August. And Ryan, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Hope that was
Yeah.
helpful.
Thank you, David. There really was a lot there, and some heavy hitters too. Being able to write to database with Tableau Prep, I know will make that very useful for a lot of people. Even small updates, just like adding the in operator. I've been wanting that since I first started using Tableau many years ago, and I'm excited to finally see that there. We're a couple minutes over time, but there were a couple of good questions that I wanted to make sure that we get in, and then. But if anybody needs to go, you're obviously totally free to go. Thank you for coming. One of the questions was on going back to, I think, one of the first pieces on the relationship, and the question was, coming from a SQL mindset, how does the new relationship feature impact or handle Cartesians? And I think this is making reference to, because I know you can go further into the default settings of that and change the direction, right?
Yeah, I don't think I've poked at this a lot. I would say that if you need a Cartesian, and sometimes you do, you can still do it generally. I don't think that that's changed at all. That would be true in relationships or in the standard data model. And on the other side, I don't think there's anything in there that like automatically that automatically prohibits Cartesians. So that flexibility should be there, but with great power comes great responsibility. Please be careful. Cartesians can be very, very bad if you're not careful.
Then another question, also from Kevin Peters, is on performance with the in operand. Would it, do you know what's more performant, using in or just saying this equal to this or?
I don't know the answer to that. I imagine it actually probably depends on how the database parser ends up parsing it out and putting it into a query plan. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
I know one of them's more readable, and that's definitely with the in. Let's see. There was another. How do you limit viewable data in Ask Data that others are not supposed to see? Is it linked to permissions? For example, only Bob should see Bob's sales, but Nancy should see Bob's sales and Gemma's or Gemma's.
Yeah, all that should be automatic. Ask Data is just a layer on top of the data source, and the data source will still respect things like your identity. It will respect any row level security filters you have in there. There's several techniques for doing those row level security filters, which is what you're talking about here, but all that will be respected by Ask Data.
Okay. Well, and since we're out of time, I want to kind of close things off there. David, really appreciate it. That was enlightening. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I even try to keep up with the updates and still learned a bunch from your presentation. So really appreciate it. Appreciate Danny and Debbie and everybody else for joining and then also speaking, of course, and then all of our Seattle friends and everybody from around the region that's joined. Thank you for coming, and look for the next tug. If it's not Portland, Seattle will be having one soon. Bellingham will be having one soon, hopefully at some point. So there's plenty more to come. Thanks, everyone.